You are now watching KITV.
Today we're going to start in Hebrews chapter 13 verses 5 through 6. This again is our second lesson in the new series called The Great Issues of Life. Last week, or the lesson number 1, was the great issue of marriage. Today we want to cover the great issue of money. These things are very present with us, and so come with me as we go to Hebrews chapter 13 verses 5 and 6. And let me read this out as we start. Let your conversation be without covetousness, and be content with such things as ye have. For he had said, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. So that we may boldly say, the Lord is my helper, and I will not fear what man shall do unto me. Remember them which have the rule over you, who have spoken unto you the word of God, whose faith follow, considering the end of their conversation. So let me ask this question: what percentage of our lives is touched by money? Yeah, another question for you: what areas of our lives are impacted by money? Is there anything in our lives that is not somehow affected by money? When we understand this truth, we will realize that Jesus spoke so much about money, its power, its usefulness, and its dangers. You've heard me say this many times over, that we are to master money. We are not to let money master us. Jesus actually spoke more than twice as much about money than he did on the subjects of heaven and hell, which seems to be the two subjects that preoccupy so many people's minds and hearts. I want us to look at a couple of areas here where money touches our lives, if you're ready for it. Number 1, food. Number 2, clothing. Number 3, shelter. Number 4, vehicles and travel. Number 5, to some extent, even our friends. We tend to be around the people who are in the same social, economic level as we are. Education level. Number 6. Our hobbies, number 7, our vacations or lack of them, because we don't have money. Money has impacted us. The size of our families, money impacts that. The way we celebrate just about anything, money impacts that. The type of jobs we look for, money impacts that. The community involvement, money impacts that. Our exercise, recreational activities, money impacts that. Our politics, money impacts that. Our utilities, money impacts that. Our church and religion in general, money impacts that. Let me propose something as we start out tonight or today. Money impacts every area of our life, even our spiritual lives. Therefore, God calls us to be good stewards of everything material we receive in life. Proper use of things can make or break our spiritual life. It's the same if you are a carpenter. Your proper use of your tools will keep you in the business or in the trade a very long time. You misuse your tools, you produce a bad job, whatever job you're working in. All right, we want to talk, number 1, about accountability. Luke chapter 16 and verses 1 and 2. Pay attention to this. And he said also unto his disciples, there was a certain rich man which had a steward, and the same was accused unto him that he had wasted his goods. Verse 2, and he called him and said unto him, how is it that I hear this of thee? Give an account of thy stewardship, for thou mayest be no longer steward. So as you can see, Jesus here is talking about the importance of stewardship. So I said we want to talk about real accountability as the first point, insofar as money matters are concerned, insofar as the great issue of money. Some people have a very cavalier attitude about it. Verse 1 here, the role of a manager is introduced, or the role of a steward who is given responsibility to steward stuff that does not belong to him. He owned nothing but managed everything, owned by someone else. You and I are stewards. Even as I'm sharing with you in this series, I've been given a stewardship over material now that I have to give an account for. I must be a good steward of it, and that's why I make these lessons available to you, so that I can one day when I stand before him say, I've been a good steward of what you've given to me. Through management, he was allowed to earn for himself some profit, as you can see in this first verse. He could waste the profits, or he could invest the profits. This manager had taken the attitude of, I'll enjoy life now and worry about tomorrow, sometime tomorrow. And that seems to be the attitude of so many. God gives us so much, we think we're just going to blow it, we're just going to enjoy it, spend it on ourselves, go crazy, and not think about how we can steward the resources that God has given us properly. That's why we've done the Abundant Life series, so that you can have a better handle on this whole concept and idea of stewardship and the resources of God. This steward in Luke chapter 16 had used up his profits about as fast as he had gained them. And the story indicates clearly for us that he had no reserves personally himself. Obvious from the fact that he does not pay back what he had misused. Instead, he restructures the master's loans so that he, as the manager, no longer receives interest. God wants to see interest. Even our lives ought to be bringing interest. By that I mean, we've been saved. God made an investment in us, and he expects to see a return on his investment. We ought to see souls saved. We were so gracious the other day as we conducted our Resurrection Sunday. It was gracious and great to see how people came to Christ. That is a return on God's investment in us, bringing others to Christ. Our bus ministry every Friday night goes out, and there's a return on the interest. All right? This man was basically having a good time at the moment. He was about to be fired because of his cavalier lifestyle. He didn't care. Why? Because others might not be as trusting with the master's resources, having a manager with these qualities. It could hurt the owner's business with a manager who had this attitude. No business person will hire people like this. Thus, this man was called into account for his actions, something all of us will be called to at some point. After all, we all are managers. We really own nothing. Only God owns everything. While we are allowed to profit from the use of God's things, we still must realize we will be accountable for how we use those things. These instruments that we have, I'm communicating to you through a camera, through a digital, through a phone, through this wonderful wall behind me. We're going to give an account for all this kind of stuff that God has made available to us. While we are allowed to profit from the use of God's things, we still must realize we will be accountable for how we use these things. Why? Because we are only managers and we own nothing. Only God owns everything. While we are allowed to profit and enjoy, remember, it still belongs to God. Short-term use of these things are not wise. A longer plan should be in view. We should always be thinking forward, not thinking about just the here and now, but think forward. In the unlikely event that Jesus might come in another 40 years, well, you need to be able to have necessary resources to carry you through for the next 40 years. A story is told on a January 15, 1989. An article was run. A family living in West Palm Beach, home in Florida, gave permission to have their home used in a television show called BL Striker. One scene involved the blowing up of the front yard, violent crashes of cars on the property, etc. Just in the nick of time, however, somebody discovered that the family giving permission were only renting the house. It was owned by someone else in New York who put a stop to the plans. The couple renting thought it would be great fun, but not the owner of the house. You can guess how well the owners felt about their tenants after this. My thought is they got put out right away. They had to find another place to stay. So there's consequences for our behavior, consequences for the resources that we misuse. Look at Luke chapter 16 verse 2. Verse says, and he called him and said unto him, how is it that I hear this of you? Oh, what is this I'm hearing of you? You're not using my stuff properly. You're misusing my stuff. You're abusing my stuff, basically. He was called in. The time came for accountability. It always will. Every one of us will give an account. As you watch this, you need to know there's a day coming where an accounting will have to be given for the stewardship or the lack thereof of the resources that God has provided for us. The way we live will tend to be the very way we die. If we live carelessly, we will die carelessly. If we live as good stewards, we will die as good stewards. A quick story again. When Pompeii was being excavated years ago, this is the place that was covered by a volcano. Years ago, discovering of many perfectly preserved bodies were found frozen in lava. It had been preserved, even the expressions on the faces of the people who were entombed alive from Mount Vesuvius, that eruption. People were frozen in positions of trying to flee, except one woman who was found toward the volcano, her hand clutching for a string of pearls considered to be too precious and costly to leave behind. The consequences for this pause was death. She took the pearls with her, and the pearls cost her her life. So my friends, poor stewardship can cause us to lose management position and our future stability. There are real consequences for poor stewardship. And I speak to those of you who are watching. You each have a ministry. The Bible has called all of us to a ministry of reconciliation. We will all have to give an account for that ministry. And then those of us who have been called to lead God's people, the care group leaders that you're with today, or maybe the pastors, or those teachers, evangelists, whoever's watching, you will have to give an account for this. There are real consequences for poor stewardship. Second thing I want to talk to you about is action is required for poor stewardship. Luke chapter 16 verses 3 through 7. Look what it says. Then the steward said within himself, what shall I do? For my Lord taketh away from me the stewardship. I cannot dig to beg. I am ashamed. I am resolved what to do, that when I am put out of the stewardship, they may receive me into their houses. So he called every one of his Lord's debtors unto him, and said unto them, first, how much owest thou unto my Lord? And he said, 100 measures of oil. And he said unto him, take thy bill, sit down quickly, and write 50. Then he said to another, how much owest thou? And he said, 100 measures of wheat. And he said unto him, take thy bill and write 80. Now you can see the person's owing him much more, but he's telling them to write down a certain amount. Now there are choices. Verse 3 of Luke chapter 16 here, it speaks specifically, this steward made a choice. You and we are the result of a choice we made yesterday, or yesterday's. Everybody is today what they made, choices they made yesterday, or decisions. Eventually one must face the choices they make when poor stewardship has been practiced. The man had several choices. Heavy manual labor, he says, I cannot dig. However, he was in no shape to do this from earlier frivolous lifestyle of his age. I'm not too strong enough to dig, he said. The second thing, he says, I don't want to beg, or I'm not capable of begging, which he was too ashamed to do, and I'm ashamed to beg, right? Number 3, or to correct the error in such a way as to redeem his reputation and regain favor. The man, he avoided the letter of the law when making loans by writing notes that added interest without calling it interest, a common practice of the day among Jewish business deals. done by such managers. He should have just went with what was, regular business practices. This was usually how they earned their own living. And here's how it worked. For example, someone borrows 80 bushels of grain as a manager. You write the loan out for 100 bushels, but don't note the 20 bushels to the master. It is interest that you, manager, must keep in the deal. So the borrower gets a note for 100 bushels owed. The manager pockets the 20 while loaning out from his master the 80. This way the master only got 80 bushels, and the manager has made money by keeping the 20 that is paid back as his salary. Depending on the value of the type of produce, the amounts considered as salary money for the manager varied. Wheat was considered more valuable than olive oil. Hence the differences in the amount above in our scripture reference. This was the only way around the letter of the law that did not permit a Jewish brother to charge other Jews usury or interest. They rationalized it this way, and God only intended not to carry or to charge interest or usury to the poor. Thus those who were not poor could pay for the loan note, but in one sum amount, and not compounded interest as was in their day. Most everybody accepted the practice, as is evidenced by the fact that these positions of managers existed. That was how managers earned their living. But what will the man do? He faced a difficult choice: to do the right thing by honoring the law, or life without hope. So there were choices. And now I want to cover another area, comprehensive. Luke chapter 16 verses 4 through 7, we read there. The manager reasons that only good way out was to be comprehensive with his solution, to obey the law of the land, although changing the loans, with the hope that this might allow him either restoration on the job, or at least compassion by those who borrowed, so he might be cared for if the master followed through on firing him. He was trying to buy face with the public or with the community. He begins by going to those who had made the loans and rewriting the loans so that they are minus the one-time interest payment that he was allowed to keep. Also, cutting the loans owed to the master would ingratiate those who borrowed through him. That way they would feel sorry for him if he was fired. At least he would garner some sympathy or some compassion from them. So notice the change in perspectives in the manager. Before, his passion was living for the moment, and now his plan takes on the following: I know what I'll do, so that if I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses. At least I'll have a house to stay in after I'm fired. He was now concerned about the future. He was now behaving like a good steward should behave. He started thinking forward. He had a forward mindset, planning for tomorrow. And this included helping people, knowing that when he needs help, it will be there for him too. Knowing that if he helps people, people will come to his aid. This situation has refocused its priorities, or the steward, in this case the manager, refocused his priorities. Number 5, prophet starts to give way to people and his own future need. He forgot about trying to earn profit, and it gave way to people and his own future need. 2 examples are shared here as to how he plans now for the future. One man owed 800 gallons of olive oil, and his loan remade for only 400 gallons. The actual amount borrowed from the master, the other 400 was cut back, and the manager would normally get. The extra 400 gallons was the profit the steward was able to personally pocket. So rewriting the loan was not making the master lose anything. It made the one who had to repay the loan back get a much more manageable deal from him. So the next thing, it cost the poor stewardship his own income, a price worth paying if he ever wanted anyone to care for him in the future. The second example is a man who owed 1,000 bushels of wheat. Remember, we said wheat was considered, more valuable than olive oil. So the second example is a man who owed 1,000 bushels of wheat. It was rewritten for 800, thus reflecting the manager's profit being 200 bushels. The interest amount was lower because this commodity was more difficult to dilute, being grain. Less was added as interest, therefore. Again, the master's amount given in the deal was actually 800 bushels. The extra 200 bushels being kept was the manager's fee. Most deals in that day were made in oil or wheat as the chief commodities of the day. Something almost everyone possessed to some degree. This manager thus was giving away his own earnings in order to restore his reputation with the community and with the public, as well as with his master, who would, because he was about to lose everything, including the little profit that he was making. He reasoned that regain respectability and friendship would have better long-term gains for him and profits in the process. His focus had completely shifted from temporary gain to long-term one. It is a well thought out strategy, but so often we all make these same kind of mistakes. The master wouldn't fight. It was the Jewish law being upheld. He wouldn't want to look like he was against the law of God by demanding the interest payment. The people with the loan wouldn't gripe. They had less to pay back. They were probably rejoicing that this man who had charged them 1,000 now was only asking for 800. In the case of the oil, he was asking for 800. He's saying, no, just give me 400. Who's going to argue with that? The people with the loans were rejoicing. Everybody would win except the manager, who would lose money. But he would gain back his reputation and care and his future. In this way, what the Bible is stating is that the master, the steward, said this steward was shrewd. He was wise. He was smart. Verse number 5 point here. Sometimes the drive to get isn't worth the price tag. Sometimes we're so focused, we're so driven that we don't weigh up the long-term consequences. We are so consumed and preoccupied with instant gratification that we lose out on long-term joys. Number 3, Luke chapter 16 verses 8 and 9, it speaks about acceptance restored. Verse 8 says, and the Lord commended the unjust steward because he had done wisely, for the children of this world are in their generation wiser than the children of light. And I say unto you, make to yourselves friends of the mammon of unrighteousness, that when you fail, they may receive you into everlasting habitations. There you have it. He's getting a commendation here in the first part of verse 8. This is where the commendation comes in from the master, the owner, to the manager of the resources. How could the master condemn him for doing what the law required in the first place? In fact, the master was impressed with the comprehensive and careful thought that was involved in the manager's plan, and everyone gained in the exchange. Only monetary loss for the manager was experienced. Holding on to these things so tight can be wasteful. And too often, that is our situation. We hold on to something, we hold on to the little, thinking that if we let go of this, and right now, we're doomed. And sometimes, when we let go of the little, we have such a wide opening that takes place down the road for us. Clutching on to the things of this world will not allow us to keep having them. Better to invest them for eternal things. Someday we too will give an account of how we use things of this world. So it's better to invest into the eternal stocks that can be bound with rust and dust. Where is your investment today? What are you investing your life and your resources into? The master couldn't really condemn the manager any longer, or he would have appeared to condemn the law of God. Thus the manager preserved his job as well as made new friends. He also likely thought about his future more seriously from then on too. It is unlikely the manager forgot the lessons of good stewardship, because when he was faced with a challenge, we see in the second part of verse 8 and into verse 9, an interesting comment is made by Jesus. Look at this. The children of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the children of light. So basically Jesus is saying the world is more wise in dealing with their own people than us in the church. That's such an indictment oftentimes against us. The master couldn't really condemn the manager any longer. Couldn't. Simply, Jesus is saying here when he says the children of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the children of light. He's simply saying this. Just that when working out a solution, people in the world understand the importance of planning for the future and making sure the deals benefit everyone and is fair. As Christians, Jesus is saying, how many of us have made plans for both our temporal future and our eternal future? There's a magnet that and a bumper sticker that reads something like this. It says, so many of us are so heavenly minded, we are no earthly good. So it is not a question of trusting God if one plans for financial security in the future, as long as it does not mean ignoring investing in eternal purposes as well. Now we can take 100 plan for your loved ones and yourself. The next weird sounding statement Jesus makes in verse 9, he says, use worldly wealth to gain friends. Use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. This is not as strange as it sounds. It is the echo of what I just said. Plan for the future, but not at the expense of investing in eternal things.